Kevin, right as we start, please tell me, how does one go from an avid card collector who buys bricks of cards for his own collection to becoming a head of playing card department at one of the biggest magic companies, and that is Penguin Magic?
Um, Luck, persistence, risk taking. So I guess sort of the Reader's Digest version of how I did it. Yeah, I got into Magic when I was a kid, 8 years old, like many people. And then I was in high school when eBay came around, and that's what really kind of got me into collecting. I was starting to buy Magic on eBay, and I was finding older decks of cards, and this all predates, sort of the modern custom deck market. And then, of course, Illusionists put out their Black Tigers and then their Ghosts and everything from there. And the market started growing. And I always, I guess, had sort of an entrepreneurial spirit. And so a few years out of college, I decided to just sort of take a leap. And I put out my Bicycle Lefty deck just because I'm left handed. And I had always had the issue of doing a peek. So normally, most magicians hold the deck in their left hand and they would peek from this corner, and that's great. But for me, I hold the deck in my right hand, and so doing this was nothing, and doing this was awkward. And so I was just like, there should be a left-handed deck, and I didn't know any better. I was in my early 20s, and so I just sort of went for it. And both the Magic and the playing card communities are really small. So if you start going to conventions and working within the space, so had done the lefty deck and I started working with Murphy's Magic, who's the big distributor. And then just over the years, you get to know folks. And so at the time, I was living in New York and I got to know Alex Pandrea. And so I was starting kind of my own production stuff. I had a little company called the New York Magic Project. And so I produced Alex's first DVD. It was something called AMPM that he did with a friend of his, Jonathan Price. And then when Alex finished college, we had been, always sort of sounding boards for each other with developing ideas and products and whatnot. And so I was helping him a lot with Blue Crown and House of Playing cards. And then as that was growing, it just made sense for me to finally leave my day job and go into the Magic and cards full time. And so I was doing that with Alex for quite a few years. And then the opportunity came up a decade ago. It was 2015. I knew the folks at Penguin. Again, you go to conventions or any of this stuff, you're buying and selling, and you kind of get to know the community. And so yeah, the opportunity arose to move over to Penguin and oversee their custom decks and whatnot. And that was an opportunity I couldn't say no to. And the rest is history. Here we are 10 years later, still rocking and rolling.
If we go back to your days at the House of Playing Cards and the Blue Crown, what was your
Mhm.
role there, and how many and which decks were you involved in?
I was involved with every deck. So I started working with Alex just loosely on the peripheral, kind of as a friend and sort of free help on occasion before either company launched. And then I officially came on board as an employee on the 1 year anniversary. So we had launched Blue Crown in 2011, I want to say, and I officially was a full-time employee as of 2012. And then I think my title was what the heck was it? It really didn't matter. It was mostly me and Alex and a couple other people. Director of production, I guess, was what we called me. But yeah, no, I was involved in pretty much every deck. So the Nox, a few people know this. The Nox, the core concept came from me. I still have an email that I had sent to Alex where I said, what about just a solid back design with a white border? And he had the Nox name, and it was very much a collaboration. But yeah, that was there. So yeah, no, there was no HOPC deck up through, once I left, obviously he did way, way more versions of Nox and other decks without me. I'm not trying to take credit for any of Alex's work or ideas. But yeah, I was there for sort of that early heyday from launch through 2015. Yeah.
You mentioned, and I think that's one thing I want to highlight the most throughout our conversation. You are one of the lesser known forces in the playing card
Hmm.
community. Not many
Sure.
people know you. Not many people know your name,
Right.
but you've been
Yeah.
involved in hundreds of decks over the years. And uh,
Yeah.
I think there are very few people who knew you were involved in the Nock playing cards.
Sure.
Can you tell me a little bit more how the marking system was developed for Nox?
Um, yeah, I know that Alex had seen a an ESP deck that had corner markings, and we realized that we could apply that sort of same marking to the four suits. And so it was a directional thing. That was sort of the one bummer of the original suit marking system. So the Nock V1 were unmarked. The V2 we added the suit marking system. And so then Randy Butterfield executed the actual design. We had gone to him with the idea and we said, hey, it's going to be, these corners and whatnot. Or I'm sorry, I'm getting ahead of myself. With the suits only, it can be either way because you're still just counting corners of, pointed versus rounded. It was when I had come up with Alex wanted to do when we were doing the signature series Knox, the early ones, we did the Alex Pandrea signature series, which was an all white back with just a black line on it. It was like one of the most simplistic back designs probably ever made. And I realized with that design that because that black line had both an outer and an inner corner, that now we could mark it for both suit and value. So I think it's the deck with the least printing on it that's also fully marked. And that one had to be one way because the suit marking system stayed the same. That was on the outer corners, but the inner corners of that border line were binary. And so you had to know your starting point with orientation for that. And so we put a very subtle curve to the borderline on the top edge. It was very difficult to see. It was hard to read. It was less an exercise in making a working marked deck and more an exercise in creativity and can we do this and can it function even if it's kind of hard to read and use. So yeah, I came up with the system for the fully marked Knox, and I know variants of that have been used subsequently on like the Knock Pro and I think the Knock Luxury, that sort of thing, which is awesome to see. But yeah, lots of people don't know my involvement there, like you say, or same thing. The Bicycle Elite Edition that we've done at Penguin was pretty much fully my brainchild. USPC had released the Thin Crushed stock. This was about 2015, 2016. Yeah, probably 2016. And we had done the choice decks with Ben Colosi, and they were beautiful and I loved the feel. That was the first deck that Penguin did on that USPC Thin Crush stock. And as I was handling them, I just said, wow, I would love to have rider backs on this Thin Crushed stock, and pitched it to the bosses and came up with the elite name and kind of the whole pitch. And we said, okay, yeah, let's print a test batch. And so we did a small batch that sold out very, very quickly. And that was also at the same time that we were launching our marked maiden backs. So I was heavily involved in the design of those as well. And so the very first run of marked maidens was printed on classic bicycle stock. And then we immediately switched that over also to the elite, the thin crush stock. And those now have been on the market for, yeah, about 8 years and continue to be sort of bestsellers at Penguin. So those contribute a lot. I'm able to say, over the course of the last 16 years that I've been designing and producing decks, I can say, hey, over 1 million decks sold worldwide. And obviously, big parts of that are things like Nox and Crown decks, and certainly Elite Bikes and Marked Maidens. But I always get a kick out of it. Sometimes people, when they find out that I work for Penguin, I'll be at a convention or something, and I'll see that they're using the Marked Maidens in particular. And they'll say, oh, yeah, were you involved with the Marked Maidens at all? And I'll say, yeah, my name's on the box. And this just goes to prove how little anyone actually reads the fine print on the bottom of the box. And I'll look at the bottom of the tuck box and see my name on there, along with Ajar, who's the company owner and president, and Bridget, who was a key factor in actually executing the design, and Rick Lax as well. So yeah, the four of us are named on the bottom of the Marked Maidens. But people are like, oh, didn't realize you were on there.
The Elite Edition was basically an introduction of the Thin Crush stock to like the mainstream playing cards because previously it was used
Mm-hmm.
by Dan and Dave, which they
Yes.
developed it for the Hollingworth playing cards. And as you mentioned,
Yep.
you first used it with Penguin on the choice playing cards on the clover bags.
Mm-hmm.
What was the appeal for you for the Thin Crush stock? Because I don't know if you wanted it or if you thought it would happen, but it basically started a whole new era of playing cards because nowadays the majority of playing cards are printed on a crushed stock.
Yeah, and it's really funny because I think back to those kind of early modern custom era, as I like to think of it, with Illusionist, and they had gone towards thicker
Yeah.
stocks. There was a period of time where, everyone was really kind of wanting that beefier stock, which resulted in like the Bicycle Masters edition, which was, almost 20 years ago. And yeah, it wasn't inadvertent. I wasn't, I don't want to take the credit or the blame. A lot of it is happenstance. And yeah, we weren't the first ones to use the thin crush stock. But I certainly think, yeah, the elite bikes were so affordable and so recognizable. There's no arguing that bicycle rider backs are the design for especially magicians. And so when you have an affordable deck in a popular, familiar design, we were, selling these by the brick and selling lots and lots of them. And so it was a great way for people to get introduced to that thin crush stock. And then once they were seeing other custom designs coming out on the same stock, they were like, oh, yeah, I've handled that. It feels great. I think a big part of why it caught on is just the flexibility and the broken in feel right out of the box. So I'm actually fidgeting right now with a deck that Penguin didn't put out. These were a recent release, these Arco
Yep.
reprints, which are on the thin crush stock. And I think a big part of it is just, yeah, that flexibility. When I crack open a new deck, I immediately want to be able to spring it and do Pharaoh shuffles with a bridge and that sort of thing. And not that it takes forever to break in a new deck of cards, but there's just something nice about it feeling great straight out of the box. And, helping moves be, I guess, a little more effortless. And so certainly nowadays compared to 15, 20 years ago, cardistry is a much bigger thing than it was. And so I think that's been a factor as well. I know that the thinner crush stocks have been really popular in the cardistry world, particularly the Cardamundi Slimline, which unfortunately now is no longer an available option. But I know that skyrocketed in popularity, between when it was a brand new option to when it was sort of like a super popular option was a really short window of time.
I don't know if you can say this, but how many Elite Edition decks have been printed since the original release?
Tons. I don't know for sure. Honestly, I'd have to go back to my records and look. Under a million, but certainly hundreds of thousands to give a range.
That's a crazy number.
Yeah.
If we go back to Nox, Nox were marked,
Mhm,
and
mhm.
when if people know you, they know your big interest is marked cards.
Sure.
Where did your love for marked cards come from?
I think just their usefulness in magic tricks. The very first real exposure I had to marked decks was the Kirk Charles book from Hermetic Press, which I bought, I want to say, in the late 90s from my local magic shop, somewhere around there. And it just sort of opened up a whole new world for me. And then when we finally got kind of into the world of factory marked decks, so in 2005, we had both the Boris Wild marked rider backs came out and the Ultimate marked deck from Magic Dream. They came out within a few months of each other, funnily enough. And that was the first time that USPC had allowed marked rider backs. And they really only allowed them for a period of about 10 years, from about 2005 to 2015. And it was really funny how quickly magicians in the community got accustomed to having factory marked bicycles when everything before, you had to hand mark it with ink or something or put on a decal. And yeah, for me, I think it was just the fairness and the impossibility of tricks that are opened up by marked decks. And then with them as a tool, the more I studied them and used them and kind of learned the history of them, finding just all of the clever and creative different ways that you can mark decks and kind of, it's sort of like creating a puzzle, but it's also like creating a different magic method where, it's one thing to take an existing design like rider backs and say, hey, how can we work within this existing design and find a good way to mark it versus creating a whole new design from scratch where you're planning for it to be marked right out of the gate. And so you can incorporate the marks in the design a lot more organically rather than kind of adding them after the fact. But yeah, I don't know. I think the fact that as a tool, they're interesting in and of themselves, to where you can say, hey, look how clever this particular marking is from so and so, whether it's a binary system or an openly readable system. And then from a performance perspective, because even though I am a collector and a producer and everything, I feel like I come at cards as a magician first and foremost. And so it's like, hey, with a marked deck, you can use it for any other trick that you would normally do, as long as you got your full 52. But then you can add these extra layers of impossibility and these other routines that you just can't achieve with an unmarked deck. So it's like, hey, yeah, why not get more bang for your buck if you're going to carry a deck around anyway? It may as well be marked.
I've recently watched your presentation on history of marked cards that you did for the
Mhm.
52 plus Joker card convention. People can watch that on
Yeah,
YouTube. We'll leave it linked in the description.
awesome.
But tell me, how many marked decks do you have in your collection?
It's by no means the largest in the world. A couple hundred, probably. The gambling world certainly is full of a lot more examples of marked cards. And the Magic world, especially with Kickstarter, I feel like I'm delighted by it, but it's hard to keep up with. So many more marked decks are coming out all the time, and just decks in general. I think last
Yeah.
year there were something like 800 new decks on the market, broadly marked and unmarked. So it's hard to keep up with which ones are marked and aren't. And some aren't advertised as being marked. So I love when a new deck comes out and flat out says that it's marked, because I'm like, okay, great, I can buy that and add it to my collection. But there will be others that I'll find out secondhand. I'll be chatting with someone and they'll say, oh, did you know the such and such deck is marked? And I'm like, no, I didn't know that. Now I got to go get one. So, yeah, a couple of hundred marked decks that are distinctly different, I would say. And then, of course, duplicates of things like the butterflies and the mark maidens and things like that. Yeah.
Since you've studied a lot of history of marked cards, you've been involved in making dozens of marked cards, I suppose.
Yeah,
What
maybe not dozens, but several.
uh,
Yeah, I've done several marked decks.
what makes a good marked deck for you? What should what the
From
features should be? How should it look like?
Yeah, the big thing is speed of read for me, because that's the thing. And this goes back to Al Baker. This is in the history talk that you mentioned. So I don't remember the quote off the top of my head, but Al Baker in his book Pet Secrets that was published in the early 1950s, he speaks to the fact that the marks should be large and easy to read so that you can just read them very quickly and easily, because it's that suspicion. If you really have to look at a deck and squint and it takes you 20, 30 seconds, and also application. So if you're gambling, if you're looking to cheat in a card game, you do want a very, very well hidden mark, because if you get caught, obviously that's big, big trouble compared to a magician. If a magician gets caught using a marked deck, it's really no big deal. It's not the end of the world. Someone might tease you or something, but nobody's going to beat you up for it, or worse. So certainly application has a lot to do with the actual system that you're using and kind of what's ideal for that purpose. So yeah, if you're into crooked gambling, a much more discrete coded system is certainly the way to go. And then just working with it a ton until you're so good at it that you can recognize it and read it super, super quickly. But for magic mark decks, yeah, anything that's easy to read. And for some people, they can read and calculate a binary system super fast. But for most people, it's a large and, not super camouflaged system. And one thing for me that has always helped, I'll give you a little sneak peek, honestly. Nobody has seen this deck. This is one that we did at Penguin, designed by Alex Haynes. This is called the Alliance Meadowback, and let's see
Okay.
if we can get a focus on here. Yeah, my webcam is not wanting to focus. So yeah, that's great. See if you can find the marks of this blurry deck.
I'm afraid I can't, but I like the back design. It looks really
Yeah, and
classy.
that is always my goal, is that the deck needs to feel. So it's not necessarily about one design element or another. The deck needs to feel normal. It's in your typical locations, so
Okay.
it's marked where you would expect most openly readable decks to be marked. And they're nice, big, easy, open marks. But a big thing when considering a design is what elements the eye is naturally drawn to. And knowledge versus lack thereof. So in something like a Marked Maiden or this or whatnot, people's eyes are going to always generally be drawn towards whatever the main kind of central
Yeah.
element is. And we see that in rider backs. I have a folded rider back card here. So, and that's why so many marking systems exist in the periphery of rider backs, is because everyone's focus is right
Yeah.
there on those middle elements. And then what draws your eye is the corner elements, those angels. And so same thing with tally hos. I have a tally ho circleback marking system that I've used that's very bold and pretty blatant, but people just don't see it because their eye is drawn to that huge circle in the middle. And so same thing here with these meadowbacks, even though the marks are pretty large and hanging out over here. So you can see probably right there. I'm reading it backwards in the camera, but I think that's a K.
Yeah.
So this is a king. Yep, king of hearts. So very open, but people's eye is immediately drawn here and then up to like the swans and then to the corner to the smaller birds. And by then, like, because it's not ever a case if you're doing magic tricks with a mark deck where you're like, here, please take the cards and examine them. You know, you're spreading and shuffling the cards. And as soon as you've had someone pick a card, their focus is here and just trying to remember. It's easy for magicians to remember cards. You know, we're like, oh yeah, I did a show 3 days ago for so and so, and he picked the nine of clubs. People, you know, average people have a hard time remembering the card that they picked 2 minutes ago. So there's so much going on. And yeah, if you're relaxed and treating the deck casually, I think you can use like the Henry Evans Phoenix deck, the Daredevil deck. The marks on that are like 2 inches tall or something. But you can use them for audiences and they just don't see it. And I think magicians get kind of the equivalent of thumb tip guilt with mark decks. Like when the first time you start using a thumb tip for anything, you feel really self-conscious and guilty about it because you're like, man, this is huge and it doesn't match my skin and like this is going to be so obvious. And the more you start working with it, you realize that through, you know, minor handling techniques and camouflage, but more so through direction of attention rather than misdirection, that people just don't see it. And it's kind of the same with marked cards. The more you use them and the more comfortable you get with them, and you know this working with Andre, the more you can use them quickly and casually and yeah, kind of not put any heat on them. And if you don't care, the audience won't care. Those sorts of philosophies. Yeah.
When can we expect the release of the new deck? Do you know? Do you know the release date?
I'm not sure, to be honest. Yeah, I'm not certain. I know we're going to be putting it most likely in some of our kits that we have coming up. And we may do a little standalone release. This first batch, we only have 400 decks. So I'm not sure if we're going to actually release any of those or not. We may. I don't have any release details on those yet. But hopefully soon. It was great working with Alex,
Yep.
and I want the world to see that work. And hopefully he and I will do, or he and Penguin will do several more projects down the road as well, because yeah, he's been wonderful to work with.
Yeah, the deck looks really great. That brings me to your work at Penguin Magic. Penguin is a huge company, one of the biggest in the world. How long is the pipeline for new decks, for new releases?
It really depends. So we have done decks very quickly, where we went from idea to launched deck in a couple of months. And we have done others that took years because we were just kind of iterating the design and just kind of waiting for the time to feel right. Most decks, I would say, whenever we've had a concept and we decide to design it, the actual design process on average is 2 to 3 months. And then it also just depends on how quickly we're releasing decks. We're not releasing them nearly as quickly as we used to. The busiest year that we had was 2022. We released about 30 decks that year because that was kind of the height of when we were putting decks in our TGIF program, the Today Get It Free thing. So every Friday we would do new promos where it was, you know, if you buy such and such a thing or a certain amount, you would get free bonus gifts. And we felt that decks were a really great thing to have for that. So in 22, we were doing a new, just sort of for sale, like bigger run deck of, you know, 2,000-3,000 decks. We were doing one of those a month, and we were doing 2 new TGIF decks a month as well. And the TGIF decks were print runs of 500 and really not meant to be sold. They were really meant to be that bonus gift for people buying a particular product or spending a certain amount. And so, yeah, we did 30 decks that year. And with that, yeah, you really have to organize your pipeline. And so with those, we would design the deck, kind of in our typical time frame, but we had a lot of overlapping designs. So, we'd be working with a half dozen or more designers simultaneously, or I would be, that's my job as production manager, just to be interfacing with those designers and giving them feedback. And so I work a lot in a capacity as an art director rather than a designer. Um, and then though we would kind of just have those designs in the can, and sometimes we would have to wait up to a year between when a design was done to when it actually just was its turn in the pipeline. So like I distinctly remember the spacecraft deck, which that one was a full release deck, but I know that that one was done. The artwork was completely finished and print ready for about a year before we actually released the deck, just because of how much we had loaded our pipeline and just had to kind of get through it. And now we're focused more on doing more like 4 to 6 decks a year, something like that. So that's nice because we can have things really rolling. But it depends. We had started, so we love to do a deck every year around Christmas time. And so the deck that we had launched last year was an 8-bit style deck called Santa's Sleigh Ride. And we had started working on that design. I had had the concept more than a year before that Christmas. So like we had the completed back design done more than a year before we put that deck out. Whereas right now, the same designer who did the Santa Sleigh Ride, he's working on our Christmas deck for this year, and we've only just sort of locked the back design on that. So, and Christmas is only a few months away, so it just sort of depends year to year. So that one, the design will probably be done in its entirety sometime this month or maybe August, and we'll go right into production on that, so that it can be done in time for the holidays.
You've already touched on that. What does your job involve? You're head of the playing card department, so I think
Mhm.
you oversee the production. You've already touched on that. How much are you involved in the design process? Do you work with the artist? Do
Very.
you design something yourself?
Yeah, I'll do certain designs and things. Usually a lot of tweaks. A designer will send us something, and sometimes if there's just a really minor adjustment, I know that it's easier if I just implement that, or things, very, very minor things. This isn't something that I would even call design, but I don't worry about bothering our artistic designers with like putting the text and P3 logo and stuff on the bottom flap of the tuck box. I'm like, I can throw that on there. My job has evolved over the years. When I got hired, it was really with a heavy focus on just the playing cards. And over time, it has really come to encompass sort of all print production. So I oversee the majority of our packaging as well. And some of that came along with some things like you can see on the shelf back here, the Deland, the box set there. That was a little
Yeah.
2 deck set that we did with our Deland Centennial Edition. And so now I also handle most of the working with artists and production of our magic trick packaging as well, whether that's something that comes in one of the nice magnetic boxes or something that comes in like a baggie with an insert. And also about 8, 9 years ago, I started working on book production. So I don't know how many people know the Hermetic Press catalog. Hermetic Press was started by Stephen Minch, I want to say in the late 80s, early 90s. And around the same time that I was hired at Penguin, Penguin acquired Hermetic Press from Stephen Minch and started reprinting some titles that were out of print. And we have overseen production on the new titles that Stephen had been working on, things like the Jeff Lotta books and other titles from One Temeries. And so I've been involved for most of my time at Penguin in the actual production of the books. So I don't write the books. Sometimes we just did sort of our first real in-house book earlier this year. It was Craig Petty's book, Absolute Madness. And that one we did in-house at Penguin start to finish. Eric Tate was the main writer on that. And so I was an editor and proofreader on that book, and then also yeah worked with artists to get the cover design, and then did the actual production process with our book printer. So yeah, kind of all things paper and ink. I came into Penguin with the focus on playing cards, and then they said, hey, yeah, you know how to get cards made, you could figure out how to make packaging and books and that sort of thing. So yeah, if it's something printed at Penguin, I don't do 100% of it. Obviously we have a great team and lots of people wearing a few different hats, But yeah, most things that are made of paper and ink at Penguin, I have some level of involvement with.
That's really interesting. I didn't even know that.
Yeah, that's the fun thing of being behind the scenes
Yes.
is, it's more about the brand and the product than me, and so I'm just excited to be involved with the stuff. I can be like, wow, I helped produce a Juan Tamariz book, like that's the like nobody needs to know that I like am the one who said, hey, printer, use this fabric for the cover.
Are there any new reprints coming out of older books?
Yes, we're actually, this has been a really exciting year for books and particularly for mentalism. So for the mentalism lovers, we already put out like the Chuck Hickok books. We reprinted those. They'd been unavailable for quite a few years. And we just published Chris Carter's new book in the Spotlight, which is wonderful. We are reprinting with Drew Beckenstoss. We're working right now on Architect of the Mind. That's been off the market for a while, so that'll be coming before the end of the year. We did a reprint just recently of Mind, Myth, and Magic, the T.A. Waters book, which is humongous. That one's great. So yeah, certain things we're always reprinting just because we want to keep them in stock. The classics like Card College and Mnemonica and the Books of Wonder. Hermetic is really a marvelous catalog of just sort of these kind of must-have texts in your library. And so yeah, this year has been more about quiet reprints because we try to not have people notice when we've done a new batch of mnemonica. It's just like, oh, we're running low, let's reprint it, fine. But it's always really exciting when we take one of these that's been out of stock for a while and bring it back. So yeah, like Mind, Myth, and Magic or similar ones. And another one that we're all really excited about is the Ted Karmelovich mentalism book is going to be coming before the end of the year. And that one's great. Mark Sky's been working on it for a long time, and he's just got great attention to detail. And he's really wanting it to be a great tribute to Ted. So that's going to be an exciting one as well. So yeah, it's been and that's where some years like this year we've only done a handful of decks of cards, but we've been very heavy on the books, and so that's where kind of a lot of my time and attention has been this year. But yeah, I'll still always love the decks, but in a more and more crowded marketplace, you do have to start to get more selective and saying like, okay, yeah, we're not going to release a deck every month, but yeah, let's do sort of ones that we know are just sort of more fun and interesting. And it's like if they're more compelling to us as a team, hopefully they'll be more compelling to a buying audience.
What's your favorite book that you've worked on?
Oh goodness, that's a really tough question. Probably I would have to say the Magic Rainbow, which was a Tamariz one, partly because I'm just such a big fan of Juan and that book in particular, but that was also the first one from Juan that I worked with that was like a new title. So I had done, we started to reprint Mnemonica and some of Juan's other work, The Magic Way, but Magic Rainbow was the first new one that I worked on. And so that was great to be like, because I had first gotten Mnemonica in my early 20s, and I first saw Juan perform at a convention in 2010, and I was still very, very new in the Magic and deck space, so I didn't know if it would just become a hobby. I had no idea it would become a career. And so that one, just by kind of sheer miracles of timing, we were able to debut that book at Magi Fest when Juan was the featured speaker, lecturer, performer. And so I was able to, have Juan sign my copy in person and know that this was the first book of his work that I had really had some part in bringing it out in its first release, rather than a reprint. So that one, I mean, the content is wonderful, but it's a favorite for me because of more of the circumstances of how it got printed and when it came out and was released, and being able to say like, holy smokes, like we literally, the day the convention started is when we got a shipment of books arriving at the hotel just because of, yeah, miraculous timing. So yeah, that one will always stand out.
And which one is your favorite content-wise?
Content wise, and we haven't actually reprinted this yet at Penguin, but it's part of the Hermetic catalog, so I'll go for it. I'll say Marked for Life, the Kirk Charles Mark deck book, which I'm hoping that we can reprint that at some point. But
Any plans?
yeah, that one's for sure. Nothing firm. We've chatted about it, so definitely it's a possibility. Part of that is figuring out. So that book had been licensed out to do the slightly altered version called Hidden in Plain Sight, which included the material about Boris Wilde's marking deck system. And so, we'd have to figure out whether or not we would be reprinting the original or the expanded one with the extra content, and just, making sure that everyone involved all is on board and whatnot. So we haven't had all of those conversations yet, but yeah, I think mark decks are as popular, if not more so now than ever. So I would love to see it come back. But I mean, it's how do you choose? Between I'm lucky enough that it's like we've got Card College and the Books of Wonder and all these great titles, all this mentalism stuff. So it's in terms of content, it's really hard to just pick a favorite because I'm not really like a specialist when it comes to magic. Like I do both magic and mentalism, and so like yeah, I have more sort of favorite individual tricks that I like rather than like I love this entire book from cover to cover.
We've talked about books you've been involved in. What are some
Mhm.
decks you've been involved in their production or the design or basically anything regarded them that people might not know you've been involved in, like the Nox from Blue Current?
Yeah, in terms of bigger ones, certainly the Nox and yeah, the Elite Bikes, things that we've already discussed. Some that I was really proud of, I did make sure to like put my name on there in the ad copy. So some of the mark decks that I've done at Penguin, where we worked with Phil Smith, we had done the Screams at Midnight deck. So I think people are aware, if they read the ad copy I mentioned there. But I love that deck. It was a super fun concept, and it just came about. I went to Phil. I go to the 52 plus Joker convention every year. We mentioned 52 plus Joker. So for those who don't know, it's the world's largest card collector club. Highly recommend that you check it out. I'm just a member. I'm not like a spokesman or anything. I pay my dues with like everyone. But kind of like the Magic community, it's this wonderful, small, close knit, dedicated, passionate community of people who love playing cards. And they hold their convention every year in October, and it's always in a different city. This year, I'm thrilled because it's going to be in Charlotte, North Carolina. I live in central North Carolina, right near Raleigh, so it's great when it's sort of a drivable distance for me. But they've had it in Orlando and Chicago and Vegas and Cincinnati and Niagara Falls. Last year was Niagara Falls, which was really fun. So I would highly recommend that people check out the club and check out the convention. But because the convention is in October every year, it's always kind of a nice time to think about debuting a deck that's related to Halloween or something. And so I went to Phil Smith and I said, hey, I want to do, a marked kind of spooky Halloween deck. And we kicked some ideas back and forth and came up with the idea of this 3D, monster movie thing. And I can't remember if I came to him with the 3D aspect or not. I may have. And that's the sort of the fun thing and also the problem when you've done yeah, a few hundred decks over the years, you start to forget some of the fine details. But Phil had a really cool idea for a marking system that didn't really land with the public. Like it is a little tricky to read, and I think people have gotten so spoiled in a way by things like the Marked Maiden deck or Phil's optical marking system that he used on the DMC Elites and now that he uses on the Elysian Duets. Myself included, generally, yeah, I want a deck that's nice and easy and quick to read for all the reasons that we talked about before. But I also like experimenting and trying new things and whatnot. And so that one was admittedly harder to read, not impossible. And some of it I think is also just setting expectations for buyers. So we could have done a better job of saying, like, this deck's a little trickier to read, but it's cool and fun in 3D. So that one I really loved. And then others that people, yeah, may not know that I was involved with. I mean, any deck that Penguin has released in the last 10 years, I've had some involvement with. A lot of the concepts came from me, not all, but many. So like, yeah, like the 8-bit Santa deck, that was my concept. And others would just be sort of a broad concept. We did the glider back playing cards, and the artist that we went to for that, the main prompt that we gave him was just origami. We didn't say specifically airplanes or anything. And he did a couple mock-ups of a few back designs, and we picked our favorite. And it was these little kind of folded paper airplanes, and then that informed the design of the rest of the deck. And that one hadn't been intended to be a marked deck until the back design was done. But that was one where I realized, oh, you can have, a really comparatively easy binary marking system on this design. And so that one was designed, but then I did all of the marking exclusively. So I brought that into Adobe Illustrator and honed out the marking and did a lot of at-home print tests because it was based on a line thickness variance. So the design has sort of a grid background pattern with some diagonal lines, and I was just thickening certain lines for a coded system. And it was just a matter of finding the right amount to where it wasn't too obvious that, a layperson looking at the deck all of a sudden is like, wait, why is this line way thicker? But not subtle enough that it was hard yet where a magician's having to squint to read it. And so I think I landed on a pretty good balance on that one. So yeah, and again, I don't remember on ad copy and stuff which ones of these do or don't mention me. That one might say with a marketing system by Kevin, but I'm not sure. But yeah, the biggest thing I think is people just don't realize that Penguin has like a card guy. And I know I'm in some of the videos. I've done some just casual like deck overview videos and whatnot that aren't nearly as like fancy and polished as like the full edited trailers. It's just me kind of sitting there talking about the deck. But yeah, I mean it's super cool. I really appreciate you having me on and chatting with me about it so that I can tell people like, hey, I'm here. Like I've been doing cool work for a while. But also it's for me more about the work itself and the end product. Like I'm fine if the Magic community at large hasn't heard of me and doesn't know which projects I've been involved with, because sort of doing the stuff and having it, being able to add it to my collection is super cool. And that's always kind of informed anything that I've done, whether it's a Magic release under my own name or a deck release. So like the first trick that I ever put out was way back when. It was one of the Blue Crown debut trick releases. It was called Cannibal. It was my take on the Cannibal cards. And that just came about because it was a really strong trick that I was actually doing. And so, like, when I first started doing it, I didn't know. I was like, okay, hopefully audiences will like this. But it was constantly just getting amazing reactions. And so I was like, okay, there's something here worth sharing. And so I released it. But yeah, any little sort of tweak that I've come up with to an existing trick to make it my own or whatnot just comes from kind of wanting to use it in the real world. And same thing with decks. The like the Emperor deck was my concept, and it was in the window when I was transitioning over from Blue Crown into Penguin. So I'd been hired at Penguin, but I did a longer than usual transition to make sure that I didn't leave Blue Crown and HOPC sort of hanging. And I was just, starting to brainstorm ideas with things for Penguin. And so the first thing that we put out were the honeybees. And so that was my concept and idea. And then based on, obviously USPC has bee decks. And I was like, oh, it would be cool to do honeybees. And so the idea there was that they were originally going to be a bee branded deck, like use the USPC bee logo and everything. But during the design process, so I took sort of my inspiration images and mood boards and stuff to Randy Butterfield, and I said, hey, Randy, because we had worked with him on like the ornate decks at HOPC, and he and I got along really well. He's a wonderful artist. And so I said, hey, man, would you be interested in doing this bee spin-off deck for Penguin? And he was like, yeah, and he brought great ideas to the table, as he always does, and just made a really wonderful design. So I think a lot of people know that the honeybees are Randy's design, but I don't think that very many people know that it was sort of my concept and art direction, kind of working hand in hand with Randy on that. And those have been great. We've done a bunch of different variants of those over the years. And the Emperor deck that we did with Mark Stutzman, that was the one that I was originally kind of going towards. I was mowing my lawn, and it just kind of popped into my head. I was like, oh yeah, it would be cool to have sort of that bicycle style header of banner, but with the word Emperor. I'm like, yeah, we'll do a penguin themed deck, all this sort of thing. And then I was just thinking, I was like, man, like who would be the best artist to do that with? And Mark Stutzman immediately came to mind. I've been a huge fan of his for 20 years, ever since the original Tally Ho Blaine decks came out. And of course, he's done all the Blaine posters and things. And so, again, luckily, because the Magic and card communities are small, I had done work with Bill Kalush, who runs Expert Playing Card, as well as the Conjuring Arts Research Center. We had printed some HOPC decks with Bill, and I knew that Bill was close with David Blaine and knew Stutzman, and had done his Ask Alexander deck, had been designed by Mark. And so I asked Bill, I said, hey, any chance you could introduce me to Stutzman and let him know that I'm not just some crazy guy off the street? Because I've been doing decks for a few years at that point. And so yeah, emailed with Mark, and he was on board to do the Emperor deck, and so that was great, being able to work with him and send his pencil sketches and things to my bosses to get their feedback. And so in that case, I was very much kind of an intermediary of throwing in my own ideas, but also bringing things to my bosses and kind of taking the feedback from our whole team at Penguin and bringing any notes to Mark about saying like, hey, could we try this? Could we change that? And putting it together. But I love how that deck came out. And I mean, I'm hard pressed to find a piece of Stutzman work that I don't love.
Yeah.
Um, I think that's the case for most people. And yeah, through that 52 plus Joker organization, I was able to meet Mark that year. So this was all kind of summer of 2015 that I first started emailing with Mark. And then luckily enough, that was the first year that I attended the 52 plus Joker convention. That was in Orlando that year in October. And we debuted the honeybees and the white tally-hos there. So that was like kind of the first splash for Penguin. Those were the first Penguin custom decks that we released. And I was able to meet Mark in person. And I always tell people, I'm like, if I had an ounce of Mark's artistic talents, like I would be insufferable. Like I would just have the biggest ego and be like, I'm amazing. Look at what I made. And Mark is just like the nicest, most humble, down to earth, cool guy. And I've gotten to become friends with him over the years. And we generally see each other once a year at most at the 52 plus Joker convention. But he's such a nice guy. And yeah, he's wonderful to work with. And I'm always just interested to see what he's up to. But yeah, that was just sort of thrilling at that time. The Penguin card stuff was so new, and so to have Mark on board and we started that design. But like I say, so we talk about kind of the pipeline that it takes sometimes to get things designed. We didn't wind up actually releasing that deck until like 2018, 2019, something like that. So like that one was kind of in the works for quite a long time before we finally had like really nailed every element, and felt that the time was right to get it out to folks.
Are there any plans to work with Mark again?
Nothing firm at this point, but I would love to in a moment. I would gladly send him a message right now and say, we have a new theme, a new concept. Are you on board? Do you have time? So yeah, nothing officially on the roster, but certainly never say never. And I would be beyond delighted to do another Stutzman deck.
I can't say I wouldn't. Stutzman's decks are, I think, staples in the playing card world. Who doesn't know split spades? Who
Or
doesn't know Gatorbacks? Yeah.
exactly that. Yeah, guys like Mark and Lorenzo. It was great to work with him. We did our Odd
Yeah.
Fellows with him not that long ago, and he obviously is just a total genius and yeah, super great guy to work with. And we were just glad that he was on board because we had gone to him and said, hey, do you want to do a Penguin deck? I had known him a bit. We had emailed very early in his career. HOPC actually almost did Lorenzo's very first deck. So I've emailed with Lorenzo for well over a decade, and things wound up unfortunately not shaking out. I say unfortunately for me and for HOPC, not unfortunately for Lorenzo. He wound up doing that deck on Kickstarter, and obviously has grown his brand and success in amazing ways. And so he and I had met again. If you're into playing cards, you just need to be a member of 52 Plus Joker. I'm gonna throw that out there. In addition to the convention, they do quarterly print physical magazines that get mailed to you, and they do a monthly digital magazine that's always got just great insights and articles about history or anything related to playing cards. It's really varied. But I had finally met Lorenzo in person after like 7 years of knowing each other through email. We met at the convention in 2019. And so that was great, but you only get to chit chat a little bit. It's a busy convention and you're kind of being pulled in 100 directions. So when we had emailed him and asked if he'd be on board to do any sort of Penguin deck, we didn't have a specific theme in mind. It wasn't that we immediately went to him and said, hey, would you be willing to add a Penguin character to Oddfellows? We just went to him and said, hey, we'd love to do a Penguin themed deck with you. Are you interested and available? And he was like, yeah, I think it could actually be really fun to add in a Penguin character into that Oddfellows family and lineup. And we were like, yeah, that obviously makes total sense. And so we started working on that. And I love what he did with both of the regular decks. We had the standard one and then the Golden Snowflake, which it wasn't just a standard and then we slapped Yielding on it. It was two completely
Yeah.
different decks for sort of the standard and the special edition. But my favorite of that actually wound up being the mini deck, the Hair Ingo, which was all Lorenzo's concept because he said, "Oh yeah, we have this canned fish that's super stinky and whatnot," and he's like, "I thought that would be really fun for the mini deck," and just the color scheme that he used on that and the blind embossing, like I love the artwork and it's such a cute deck. And I'm not normally super into minis, and nothing to get like I have no complaints at all about the poker size decks from the ones we did with him, but for some reason the mini is just like my favorite of those.
I can completely understand that. It immediately stands out, not just from the Penguin Oddfellows, but from most of playing cards.
Sure. Yeah.
We've talked about playing cards you've did. Can you share or tease something coming out?
I'll give you the theme. Well, so we've had the tease on the Meadowbacks, which
Yeah.
is exciting. Always great to do a new Mark deck. I can say that we will be doing a new deck similar to we did the land donut deck a
Okay.
couple of years ago, and that was sort of a tribute to a Deland style. So for those who don't know Theodore Deland, Red Book here, and I talk about him a lot in my 52 plus Joker talk. Big pioneer in Mark decks, and a lot of his designs use sort of a clock or dial based system, and I always liked that, and I had wanted to do something there. And so when we did the Centennial Delands, those were just us kind of adjusting and updating his designs from 1919, and I wanted to do something that used that system, and I wanted to do it with a color based marking system. And it just, excuse me, took me a while for the idea to pop into my head. I was thinking about flowers and this and that. And then one day I realized it should be donuts. I was like, oh, it could be donuts. I said, and the bite taken out of the donut can be the clock position for the value, and the color of the icing can be the suit. And we'll use, icing colors to denote the suit. And so that was super fun. I brought that concept to Phil Smith, and he knocked it out of the park with the design. And some months later, a year later, Seth Race on our team. Seth oversees our sort of manufacturing and workshop in Columbus, Ohio. Seth's a super nice guy and very creative, very skilled with making of things. And he's released some things through Penguin. He has some releases under his name. But Seth pitched the idea. He said, "What if we did something really similar to the Donut Delands, and we did it with vinyl records?" And so we said, "Oh yeah," like the whole team liked that idea. And so we brought that concept to Phil and we said, "Hey, we want to do something kind of like the donuts, but switch the theme over from donuts to vinyl records." And so that'll be coming before the end of the year. That one's exciting. Yeah, the Meadowbacks we talked about. And then the theme for the Christmas deck that Felipe is working on, Felipe designed the Felipe Cardenas. He designed the 8-bit Santa and also our King Deco, which was also kind of a sleeper deck. I don't think it got like wide chatter, but it's a beautiful deck. And so Felipe is doing our holiday deck this year, and it's actually a Krampus theme. So that'll be fun. A little bit less cutesy than some of our other holiday decks.
I wonder if it's gonna be creepy.
Slightly, we're not trying to go too dark and too edgy. It's not going to be like demonic or anything, but it is a little bit, kind of more because it is just a piece of sort of dark folklore. It's a little bit more of a scary character, and so we're kind of going that direction this year because whenever we're brainstorming decks for holiday things, we talk about all of the typical imagery and situations and objects that you would think of during the winter holidays. And Krampus was just something that I put on kind of my short list and pitched to my boss and said, "Hey, here's some of my ideas." I was like, "I think this one could be really fun." And she was like, "Yeah, bring it to Felipe, see if he's on board." And he was like, "Yeah, that sounds like fun." So we've been working on it. So yeah, those will be some exciting decks still to come. So yeah, even though we're not doing 30 decks a year like we used to, we're still always, doing something fun and interesting with playing cards.
Well, I'm definitely looking forward to that. Thanks for the sneak peek into the production.
For sure, yeah. Always happy to get people excited about stuff, and yeah. And I'm also very excited. We just started shipping, so this maybe not everyone has seen. We just started shipping the Sunken Anchor decks from that we did in collaboration with Ryan Schlutz. So these I think are going to be launched on the website. Well, I don't know when this goes live. They might be live on the website now, based on when this goes live versus when we're having the conversation. But we had just run the Kickstarter for this deck. And so Ryan has a brand called False Anchors, and he's made some False Anchors decks and wrote a book and whatnot. And same thing, Ryan and I go way back to he and I met at a Magic Live convention when we were both, basically kids. And again, just how cozy and close the community is. You get to know folks and whatnot. And so he was doing kind of his own thing with the false anchors. And I said, hey, what if we did like a penguin thing with false anchors? And so we came up with sunken anchors to do sort of more of this like shipwreck theme. And again, we're going to suffer from camera focus issues and whatnot. And so this one is more in that semi-custom space. I know that a lot of collectors are like, recolored quartz, that's boring, but that's fine. The intended sort of use and audience for this is more in the magic space or the poker space rather than like super custom collector stuff. So yeah, kind of standard with the faces and whatnot, but some interesting gaffs in there. And so Ryan, has some great tricks with those gaffs that he teaches. And then we do have a cool ace of spades if I can find it. We went with this rope theme on a lot of things, like, just anchors and rope. Oh my goodness, my lighting is, there we go. There's the,
Yeah, the
you can
outline.
see the
Yeah.
photos on the Penguin website. Yeah. But so yeah, that's a very exciting recent release. So yeah, and that's sort of I don't want to say it's a bummer or a shame, but we're always working on so many new things, whether it's a new deck or a new book or a new trick, that you don't really ever get to sit and kind of bask in enjoying the thing that you just released, because it's always about like, okay, well, what thing is coming up next? And that's super fun because the ride kind of never ends. So I always do have to kind of force myself to like stop and like look at and appreciate some of the stuff that like we've just put out, and yeah, not always be super focused on like, well, what are the next 10 things that I'm doing? Yeah, it's nice to like look back and be like, oh yeah, this thing that we put out was pretty good. Well,
Looking forward to anything and everything that's coming out.
I appreciate it.
Thank you very much, Kevin, for this interview. I hope that people now get to see how much of an influential person you are in the playing card and recently in the book, as you mentioned, in the book market.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. And I really always, I love talking about this stuff. So yeah, if anyone ever wants to reach out to me through socials or anything, or if you see me at a convention, like please chat with me because I'm willing to talk about magic and cards all day, every day.
As we all
So
do. As we all do.
yeah, yeah, exactly. Right. What else is there to talk about,
Yeah.
really? But yeah, no, thank you so much for having me. This has been a pleasure.
Thank you very much.